Ich weiß, wie es ist, ganz Mensch zu sein. Ich weiß, wie du dich fühlst. Ich bin wie du, aus Fleisch und Blut, und weiß, was Leben ist.
On the 31st of May 2016, Norman Dietsch turned 88. However, seeing Norman, one would hardly think the American who lives in New Jersey that old. He is humorous, enthusiastic, curious and lively. He is still up and about a lot, is always ready to help, enjoys going fly fishing or visits with his wife Hilda, his children and grandchildren who live across the globe. After all, the two of them spent 20 years as missionaries on Manus, an island in the South Seas. That was during a time when the people there were still strongly influenced by animism and the belief in spirits. A home in the South Seas, at home with God. That's the title of today's magazine. We'd like to give you an insight into the fascinating life of Norman and Hilda Dietsch, two people with whom God has written history.
There were twins born up in Tingau village, and the mother died at childbirth. And the father came down and they asked if we would take the children and look after them. They were just born, new birth, so Hilda had the job. And I said, well, why don't you take him into the hospital, to Loringau, and the hospital will care for them. They said no, because the spirit that killed the mother, and the mother would now be angry, and her spirit would go down to the hospital and would attack the hospital and the children. And I said, well, why bring them here? Wouldn't they come and attack us? No, no, this is God's place. This is the Lord's place, because it was the mission, and God is stronger than the spirits, and so if you take care of them, they will be safe. So we became mom and dad to Herman and Gertrude. We named them Herman and Gertrude, after Hilda's sister and after my brother. And when I was on Manus back in 2014, we met Herman on Manus and we met Gertrude in Port Moresby, grown up now and having children of their own.
In 2014, the church on the South Pacific island Manus celebrated its centenary. During the celebrations, the Manusians remembered the beginnings of missionary work. When the first missionaries reached the island near Papua New Guinea on June 14, 1914, life there was characterized by cannibalism and the belief in spirits. Norman Dietsch was one of the successors to these former pioneers. From 1951 to 1972, he lived in Manus and brought the good news of the kingdom of God to the people there. He's now retired, but he didn't miss the opportunity to attend the centenary celebration.
Es gibt eine ganze Reihe von Älteren, die ihn natürlich persönlich noch kennen. Und der wurde von den Einheimischen natürlich großartig empfangen. Das war was ganz Tolles. Und ich habe den Mann bewundert. Der hat an allen Veranstaltungen teilgenommen. Der hat sich mit den Alten unterhalten und hat nach wie vor ein ganz tolles Gespür für diese Leute, für die Kultur.
My folks, they came from Germany and they came to the United States back in the 1920s. My father had fought in the German army in World War I, as did my grandfather. Then times were bad in Germany after the World War I, and so my father emigrated to the United States.
Norman Dietsch was born on May 31st, 1928, in New Jersey, near Manhattan. Despite the hard times during the Great Depression in the 1930s, Norman looks back on a happy childhood. As he developed in love of nature and farming at an early age, he started working on a farm in the summer holidays at Liberty Corner. The farm was owned by the American offshoot of the German organization Marburger Sisters. This was where Norman Dietsch first consciously came into contact with Jesus Christ.
I don't know where I would be without recognizing that God is a God of love. And despite what you see, I mean, if you look at the world around you, it doesn't look very lovely or lovable. And yet Jesus came with the message that God is love, that despite all that mankind does to each other, that there is a God who loves and who can change the heart and can bring love into a situation.
And this wasn't the only love story that began here. Over the following years, Norman Dietsch continued to return to Liberty Corner to work on the farm there during the summer months and to learn more about God and Jesus. He attended various Christian events.
And Hilda played the piano. She was very young, maybe 14, 15 at the time. And I was 4 years older. But somehow this young girl really attracted me. Just her demeanor, just her innocence and her smile and just the way she conducted herself. She was different from all the other girls. I don't think she knew that I was even around. She didn't have much interest in boys, and that was another thing that attracted me. She wasn't interested in anything like that.
I started working there on summers when I was 12, 13. You worked in the kitchen, and then through high school, 18. So always on the summers, we worked at the retreat center. It was a children's overnight camp. That's where we met, actually, at Liberty Corner.
So that's how that romance began.
Oh. No, I was not interested in those days. You know, it just happened later on.
In fact, Norman's plan was to be a farmer. But during his time at Liberty Corner, he became more and more convinced that God actually had something completely different planned for him.
I remember praying and praying on my knees, and pretty soon it was midnight, then it was 1 o'clock in the morning, and finally I was struggling. I didn't want to give in totally. So I was struggling about, it must have been 1 o'clock or even later. I said, God, I have to get up and milk cows at 4 o'clock, 4:30. So I'll do whatever you want me to do. I got to go to sleep now. And it was a very, I don't know, it was just I gave up, I guess. So that's when I began to think now, Lord, whatever you have, whatever direction you would have for me, I will go in that direction.
Norman and Hilda attended different Bible schools, and each separately developed an interest in missionary work. The turmoil and consequences of the Second World War intervened in their individual plans for the future. But suddenly, another door opened.
I had dreams of going to the mission field. And the Marburger Sisters that we were connected with, they had missionaries in China. And that's, that was my thought, to go out to China. And, China closed because the Japanese War and that, yeah.
Towards the end of the Second World War, in 1943, something terrible happened on Manos. All the German pioneer missionaries from the Liebenzell Mission were murdered by Japanese soldiers. Missionary work in the South Pacific threatened to draw to a close.
And it was read to us in missions class about the need of a missionary in Manus Island. The brother Duru, who was there, he had a hard time because he was older now, getting up in the bush, and they needed somebody to go. And also at that time, because Germany was out of favor with the Australians, they wanted an American mission to sponsor in the Manus.
Due to the takeover of power by the communists, it was no longer possible to send missionaries to China. But missionaries were urgently needed in other areas, for example, on the South Sea Islands.
I wrote a letter to Norman and said, I'm not going to go to China anymore. I'm going to go to the islands. I don't know what kind of islands, where islands are. At the same time that I wrote a letter, He wrote a letter.
And our letters crossed. My letter was going to her and her letter was coming to me, and she was saying that she wanted to go to the islands now, no longer to, I don't know, China, wherever she was going. And I wanted to go to the islands too with Liebenzell, and so the letters crossed, and they were, when I read her letter, I said, oh, this is marvelous.
In 1951, just a few months after the request for recruits, Norman Dietsch set off on a ship to the South Pacific. He hardly had any time to prepare himself for life in his assigned country. Hilda finished her final year at Bible college in the US and then followed Norman out to Manos.
Norman went out with 2 suitcases, one with clothes and one with books. And then he stopped in Australia and the lady said to him, you can't live like that. You have to take some dishes or you have to do this. I didn't take much more. Because Norman said, I have pots and pans, and, men don't need much when they go by themselves.
In Manos, Norman and Hilda were joyfully reunited, and their wedding followed soon after. However, this particular event in the couple's life was overshadowed by a very grave accident.
War mit seiner Verlobten dort. Sie wollten auf Manos heiraten. Es war dort ein Liebenzeller Missionar von Holland, der mit ihnen dort zum Standesamt gefahren ist. Und auf der Fahrt zurück vom Standesamt fuhren sie einen steilen Berg hinunter. Und der Missionar war kein guter Fahrer. Es war ein Allrad und der hat den Wagen so runtergleiten lassen, da diese steile Straße. Und hat dann unten die Kupplung losgelassen. Und dann hat sich der Wagen, weil er so stark gebremst hat, überschlagen. Der Norman und die Hilda sind beide aus dem Wagen rausgeflogen, rechts und links. Und der Missionar ist dann leider unter dem Wagen zu liegen gekommen und ist gestorben. Wenn man sich das mal vorstellt, nach der standesamtlichen Trauung erstmal so ein Erlebnis auch zu verarbeiten in dieser Zeit dort.
We were shocked and we had to deal with what was there. And you couldn't sit down and say, I'm going to cry and I'm going to wait and I'm going to, I can't do this. The only thing you could just do was say that God gave us strength to go on and not let this break us. And then a week later we were married, and then we moved to Lugos. But Norman got malaria that night. So he was in bed for a few days with fever, and I made tea, and because I didn't know much about cooking there. But anyway, we got through it.
The start of their life in Manos continued to bring the couple to face big challenges. They had to build up their life and work from scratch, without the help of the experienced missionary Daru. They were, however, conscious of their responsibility, and putting their trust in God, they saw it as a great opportunity to develop something new for the people of Manos. They concentrated on the training and further education of the local staff, so the latter should become increasingly independent.
Around that time, Norman came in 1955. Inshallah, this time we got planned Tisa long. We started in the Bible school. Dalam this Bible school, and we plus 6 pala. Yang pelaman long here, me play go longen. Again, long work on Sunday, me play lutu.
And these were all older young men. Not little ones, but they hadn't had any schooling, so they were learning from the bottom up. And after I was there, the people there said, well, you have a wife now, so we can send girls to the school, because they always kept the girls and the men separate. I mean, I taught both, just English and reading and all those basic things, because I was really not a teacher. But we learned, and we taught them and started them.
Und war derjenige, der das mit vorangetrieben hat, dass dann die Kirche damit begonnen hat, Grundschulen einzurichten, Internatsschulen. Und man muss sagen, heute hat die Kirche über 50 Schulen. Ich glaube, es sind über 5000 Schüler. Und da war Norman Dietsch derjenige, der damit die Grundlage gelegt hat.
I think what motivated us was that God had called us to this place and we were going to do it, whatever. He was going to see us through. And that's the only thing, because neither one of us ever had a chance to say, I got to get out of here. Since then, we've known missionaries, which we now have told younger missionaries, when you get to the mission field, unpack your suitcases, because you're staying, you know. Because some of them don't. They always keep a suitcase under the bed, ready to get out of that place. So that's what we learned right there. I mean, this is where God called us, and we were going to stay there and fulfill our calling, what He wants us to do. Yeah.
Their loving affection and care for others led not only to friendships among the missionaries who went out to assist them in the 1960s, but also amongst local pupils and co-workers.
No, mi wan bla gut bla madlo. Mi no man bla cross. Bla mi wan bla gut bla madlo. Pasin belong. Sapa susah di sort lig na. Mi la ko di now lig lang. I like mi like him hamas mi kisip. Ami lusting 10 minutes. Na tami like am keeping them long. Back money belong na. Yes, kim him belong na. I don't have money people become you.
Well, the reason that we actually went was because Norman convinced us. She's a nurse, I was a teacher, and that's just what was needed at that time. So I became a pioneer in the education work, she became a pioneer in the nursing field.
They're very hospitable, Norman and Hilda, and they've had all kinds of people staying with them in their home, and the local people were there every week for prayer meeting, and there was you know, like a cup of tea. It was always a cup of tea, right? And biscuits. And so...
I don't like tea.
Yeah, yeah, that was a hardship for him. He doesn't like tea. But anyway, the hospitality was very warm, and that was important.
Nothing has changed regarding their hospitality. Even today, the former Manus missionaries meet up at Norman and Hilda Dietsch's in Schoolies Mountain in the U.S. to reflect on their common experiences and the challenges they've faced in their country of ministry.
I think Norman brought in some areas, ideas. There was no offering. I think it was Norman who started that said, you know, it would be nice if they put little offerings in the plate to learn to give. Well, the people said, we don't have much money. But then they said, oh, but we have shells. And I remember that they took the shells and put them in the offering plate for us to sell and get the money, and for that money we put it toward the church. We wanted them to learn that they had to be responsible for their church eventually. That was the whole idea.
When I look back, I think, I don't remember bad times, but if you are on an island far away from the next European or the white people, and you cannot go there, and you have no medical care, and you have 4 kids bringing up them, it was very hard sometimes.
I was born in Lorengau on Manus Island in Papua New Guinea. It was my childhood, so it was like any child would be. I mean, growing up, you went to school, you had fun with the young people there, the children there, growing up with the children. I didn't know how the Americans lived, I just knew how to live out there. So it was just a different lifestyle, but I enjoyed it. That's home. Yeah, we were on an island. When I was 9 months old, I had spinal meningitis and cerebral malaria at 9 months old. And the doctors told them, it's the first time I'm talking about it, that I would not live for the night.
No, we couldn't do anything. She just came down with a fever, and it wouldn't go away. And we gave her antimalarial pills, and so Hans Knauer had just arrived on the boat. And so we went into town, and we took her to the doctor, and actually, they gave me some sleeping pills and put me in the nurse's house and said, go to bed. Because they thought she'd be dead by the next morning.
The missionary Hans Knauer went back to the mission station and woke up all the school children. Now, the school children were from age grade 1 to grade 6. He woke them all up, so there's about 200 school children, took them to church, and they prayed for me all night.
The doctor and I slept in the other room, and he was expecting her to die. So he went in every hour to check on how she was. And I remember it was about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. He came in her spasms, she had spasms every 30 seconds or so, you know, spasms like this. And then he said, you know, the spasms are lessening. She may survive. Now I get emotional again. And he said she may survive. By morning, the spasms were half an hour apart. By lunchtime, they were an hour apart. By evening, they were almost gone. And so she survived.
If people talk about miracles, I would say it was a miracle, because if I wasn't supposed to be alive now, because of that, I'm still alive now.
We really learned to appreciate how God would work in so many different ways, unimaginable ways in the lives of people. And using even events and using people who were not Christians. God is not limited in any way. I think that's what we saw. And his care for us. And it always astounded me, how could, you know, how could he love someone like me?
For over 20 years, Hilda and Norman lived and worked on Manos. After Lois, they had another 3 children of their own, in addition to their 2 adopted children, Herman and Gertrude. And then in 1972, when the local church in Manos was close to being able to stand completely on its own, their work there was over. The family packed up and returned to their new home in New Jersey, in the United States.
I was still interested in mission work, and I thought maybe I would pastor a church when I came back to America. And then I ran across Brother Vater, Ernst Vater, and he sort of challenged me to do the director of global missions ministry, because they needed someone to recruit missionaries, to do the overseas work. So I had a little bit of a change from wanting to pastor a church to continuing on with mission work.
So then the next generation of new young missionaries continued to profit from the knowledge and experience that he was ready to pass on.
Als Mensch schätze ich, dass er auf die Missionare, also auf uns Junge eingegangen ist. Und da war jetzt nicht irgendwie ein Unterschied oder Standesunterschied oder so, sondern er ist auf uns eingegangen.
Und 1974, als die Mission an die einheimische Kirche die Sachen alles übergeben hat, die Verantwortung, da war er federführend. Und das war echt, er war halt ein Kenner von der Materie, und er kannte die Leute, und er war Vollblutmissionar.
In 1974, with the transfer of all the responsibility and posts to the local church, he was able to finish his life's work in Manos and to help the church to finally become independent. He worked as director of the Liebenzell Mission USA in Schoolies Mountain until 1985. Before he went into mission retirement, he and Hilda fulfilled a dream, and in 1985, he returned to where everything had begun, to Liberty Corner, and worked there as a pastor for 15 years.
But it was like going home, because that's where we began. That's where we were. That's where we met the Lord. That's where we had our teenage until adult experiences with the Lord and with the sisterhood there. So we had a great admiration for the sisters and their sacrifice and the work that they did. So it was like going home in one way.
He's on the board. He's always trying to help here and help there and think of something that's that he can do. Yeah. He's not going to sit down in Ruhestand. He's got to keep going with his brain and with his heart and with his mind. Yeah. It's going to keep working until the very end.
I think there's no greater challenge in life than to bring a message of hope to people who have no hope, and to bring a message of love to people who feel unlovable, and to bring a message of faith to people who are filled with fear. I think the greatest thing to recognize in a world that's in turmoil, that there is a God who cares, even for the sparrows in the trees. And despite all the terrors that are in the world today, that God still is the one who gives comfort and hope and joy and fills up a heart with love. I don't know where I would be without recognizing that God is a God of love.
It is always moving to see how God leads people and what can grow resultingly. Today, the community Unmanus is independent with more than 16,000 members and runs a Bible school, 22 primary schools, 18 secondary schools and 1 high school. Because of their great heart and the love they have for each and every person they meet, Norman and Hilda Dietsch have remained guiding lights and counselors for many. It is incredible to see what God can do with 2 people's lives. We hope you have enjoyed our magazine. God bless you. Take care.